Hi. I'll try and stand away from the podium. I think, to put it very simply, there is Carbonex, and what we're looking to do is there's a problem in the world, and that's the impact that we're having as a society on global warming. And I think it's pretty clear that as a society, that problem is becoming exacerbated. The more energy we're using and the more sort of assets and infrastructure that we're developing. What we're looking to do as Carbonex is we're very simply looking to provide a solution to that. Now, very simply, the impact is there's a financial cost to a lot of organizations at the moment. The carbon tax industry is worth about $52 billion, and companies that are necessarily emitting and polluting are causing a problem that are being taxed, and that is being passed on to consumers and individuals. I think it's pretty clear that that tax is not necessarily doing enough and not addressing enough of the problems. So there are industries, for example, the airline industry, and when you're developing and building buildings which uses cement, a lot of emissions and pollutions are happening, and it's about trying to solve that problem. And from our point of view, there is a very simple way of doing that, and that's through reducing carbon emissions. For some organizations, as I said, in the airline industry, they're not able to sort of stop traveling and using their airlines. So what is the way that they go through that mechanism? And what they do, very simply, is they purchase carbon credits, which is very simply an ability to emit 1 ton of CO2. Now, for that happen, it happens through various mechanisms, whether it's through afforestation or generally businesses stopping polluting. Because for some businesses, it's a very simple proposition that they don't need the level of emissions that they are polluting, and so they can reduce them very simply and then essentially try and sell those through a platform. Now, the issue that is currently everyone is facing is there is no simple way to do that. There is no simple platform where it adheres to all the regulations and that everyone has access to that. So even if you go on Google now, and it's an interesting problem that you type in buy a carbon credit, you don't get any of that information. It's not accessible. It's strange that this problem has existed for decades and that no one has looked to address it. And I think part of the problem is it's a very difficult industry, and a lot of people are making money from it without it becoming mainstream. So from our point of view, what we want to do and what we are doing is building a platform to solve that. It's allowing people clear access of to know what you're buying and what the basics of that are, whether it's through reducing emissions or whether it's through developing and building forests. And our view is very simply that has to become more mainstream. A couple of years ago, a lot of the world leaders committed to trying reducing their emissions. The Paris Agreement came up with a lot of political fanfare and various other commitments that people will reduce their emissions and people will have these voluntary targets. Yet, since the time of when that was signed, and now 176 countries have committed to reducing their emissions, fundamentally nothing has happened. And I think it's come to a point where it's now evident that it has to be taken into the more commercial domain, that people, like what we're trying to do, have to address that problem. And that's what we're doing at Carbonex. And I think it's a very simple proposition that making carbon credits and therefore by that reducing emissions and providing a solution to solve climate change is the best option that we have available. This is the essential problem with the carbon credit market. It's a fragmented system. There really isn't the accessibility to trading. And one of the main essential elements is fraud. Now, fraud, for example, it's so difficult. From my history, I used to be providing finance to a lot of these developments of building plants, and so we were spending tens of millions of pounds trying to reduce emissions in various countries, whether it's Russia or India or certain other projects around the world. And we got to a point where, before giving the money, we actually had to make a decision of whether that asset even existed, because you have a situation where people don't know if they're even building that plant. And there were discussions about whether I was going to have to get on a plane and go out to the middle of nowhere just to simply make sure that the money is being spent developing a plant that is solving this problem. And that still hasn't happened. And what the blockchain will do for our platform is allow that provenance of those assets to be verifiable and authenticated. Now, this is very simply a graph just to show the problem that we're currently encountering and what needs to be addressed. This year, essentially 6 billion tons of carbon needs to be offset, and we're nowhere near that figure. People have committed to reducing their emissions, but nothing tangible or substantive is coming from that. And if you look at this chart, which goes up to 2030, the issue is clear. We're nowhere near on our current baseline for people to even achieve those targets, and I think it's going to take a commercial approach to solving this. The business issue is pretty simple. Companies are going to get fined more and more, and people are going to have to be limited through what they do. The financial implications are, where is that going to go? And essentially, the option is it goes to the consumer, or it'll just increase the cost of everything, and companies will have to cover that. And I think the easiest way to solve that is by allowing people to buy and sell emissions, and to actively trade them in a much more meaningful way. So what we're doing and why it's different. Our approach is, other than resolving the fraud aspect of actually knowing what you're buying and having that provenance issue, it's to simply improve the accessibility and to understand the entire carbon trading dynamics and system. Now, the reason why we're able to solve that more than most is because of the experts and people that are involved in the business. From my example, I've helped build and finance a lot of projects around the world. And so we're going to invest in these projects, and we'll understand about the regulatory regimes around that. And through that, we'll be generating revenue, which will then be able to fund the platform and make it much more accessible for people to actually buy and sell carbon credits. Our view is we don't want to necessarily make money from the sale of carbon credits. It'll be a nominal transaction simply to cover our costs, but everyone is essentially not making that information accessible, that what they're going to do is make money from carbon credits, costing people more and more, and not actually engaging people and getting people involved in the industry. So we will have a fairly circular model of that we will generate renewable projects or afforestation sites, which will go through into understanding the legislation, which will then go in through actually having access to carbon credits, which will be sold on the platform without trying to make a margin or anything significant. It's just about trying to make it more mainstream. That will incentivize trading, because I think from last year, carbon credits were worth $5. This year, they're worth $15 broadly. And I think that speculative trading is an issue that people will need to resolve, because people recognize this as a problem. Governments have committed to reducing emissions, yet haven't come up with a tangible proposition, and I don't think they genuinely will within the time frame that makes a difference. So once we've created those credits, they will be sold and people will use them in the organizations, and particularly where we've had discussions with the aviation industry, the cement producers that are creating a huge amount of emissions that are causing the problem. So that's our disruptive business solution. It's broadly, I think, a large problem is engaging governments and organizations. I think that's probably the most tangible thing to take away from this. Politics have committed to doing this for a long period of time, yet nothing has substantively happened, and I think it's going to take a commercial organization to resolve that friction. Here's the team. They're all experts in their field, and we're sort of broadly very happy to have them on board. Each of them has a very different aspect. So, for example, Barbara worked at the World Bank for several years around social projects. The part that we're looking to do around our platform is make sure where we're developing these infrastructure assets and renewable plants, that what we do is support the local community. And we're looking to sort of give the UN sustainability goals and commit to actually delivering value locally and globally. These are our current partners. And that's me.
Fantastic. Thanks, Max. We can have some questions. Anything from the floor or anything on Slido? Any questions for Max and Carbonex? Not one? It's like the end of the fourth day and everyone's exhausted.
Everyone's tired.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're involved in a lot of projects in Papua New Guinea. So one of the first plants that we're looking to build is in Papua New Guinea. It's around a timber mill, which essentially has a feedstock for a biomass renewable energy plant. And what we're looking to do there is try and save the government money because they're subsidizing petrol. We're looking to replace a diesel generator, thereby offsetting all the emissions there. And essentially, through what we're doing, we'll also look to do an afforestation aspect to that, because I think it's essential to actually having an impact in a country which, based on their natural disaster earlier this year, needs that support. And through all of that, we're also reducing the cost of energy to a country that sorely needs it.
So this is a really good example of one of the alternative use cases for blockchain where it is going to solve some really serious global problems. So I've been aware of this project and like it very much, and I think what they're doing is really important. So thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you.